So we left off on chapter 2. We were talking about all of the service outputs that are used to do market segmentation based upon channels. And we talked about how each one of these individually creates some unique desire or helps to create unique segments in marketing in which we can be able to identify with and ultimately, hopefully, market to. So, how do we actually do this? How do we segment users by service output? So, any of you who have done marketing research at all basically understands the concepts of doing research and surveys and those kind of things. And we do pretty much the same thing in channels, although it isn't necessarily what products we want, but how we want them to be delivered. So how do we segment end users by service outputs? We look at how those groups or end users differ, not in what they buy, but how they want to buy it. And so this is an example of a group that is very service sensitive, but very price insensitive. Our Albert Carroll, who is a custom tailor, targets their buyer segments by basically they go directly to whoever they wish to deal with, and they do all of the tailoring there. I have a friend of mine, by the way, who's a tailor in New Orleans. Grew up with him. He's a six-figure tailor. I asked him why was he so successful, and he said, I get their pants off. And what he meant actually was quite simple. The first thing that he always asks is, why don't you try those on? By the way, just a thought for any of you who are looking for a graduation gift from your parents, why not a tailored suit? Every one of you, at least once in your life, deserves to have some piece of clothing that was only made for you. And a tailored suit, I think, is an awesome thing. Just something to put in the back of your heads, all right? So this is one of the ways that you do it. So what is the process? Well, here's the process that we have. So you look at the group that you service, and you generate a comprehensive list of all of the service outputs that might be desired by your end users. So if I were doing this, I would come up with a list for my end users. And I would try to ask them, what are things that are important? Well, so what is important? Fast service. Okay. What about delivery? You know, how important is that to you? What is training? Maybe customer service. How important are those things? So I would develop this comprehensive list. I would write it out. I would do surveys. And then what I would do is I would use a fancy program like SPSS or any of the other programs. I would do what's called an exploratory factor analysis. And this stuff is really cool. If you've ever done marketing research, it's amazing what will happen. Is as data is put in, the information is you'll actually start to see them separate in the SPSS into unique groups. So you start to segment the groups who are maximally similar within a group. What that means is that you're looking at a definition of consumers that are collectively exhausted. In other words, it's a definition of everything that they are. This unique group. They have all of their basic answers that kind of seem to gravitate towards some unique identity. The other is that they're different between groups, which means, they're collectively exhaustive, okay, but they're mutually exclusive. In other words, it's everything that it is and nothing that it isn't. And these groups basically are not like Venn diagrams, okay? They're not supposed to connect with each other, all right? They should be different. Now, you will get some overlap, but that's really not necessarily the one thing that you're looking for, because what ultimately you're doing is you're trying to come up with unique segments for unique groups. So you look at them that they're everything that they are, nothing that they aren't, and different dimensions that matter when it comes to a distribution system. All right. Price is something that's important, but just remember that price is something that's given up. And then the last thing that you do is you name them. You give them a physical identity. You create this persona in your mind that kind of identifies these individuals into a common understanding, okay? Naming things goes a long way to understanding things. And so the step is you generate a list of of those things that are important. You use this to create a market segmentation, everything that they are and nothing that they're not, and that they differ in matters of channels of distribution, and then you name it. Now, can somebody tell me what's wrong with this list? What's wrong with the list? What's wrong with the question? What do you think is the difference? What's wrong with that question? Who do you love more, your mother or your father? You're making a choice. Couldn't all of those be important? Isn't it reasonable to assume that every one of those things are important? Well, the difficulty of asking a question is that it might be important, but some things might be more important than others. And so when you're dealing with this and realities in the new world, what you're using is what's known as a constant sum scale. A constant sum scale. So how do you know when you got a constant sum scale? Is when you have to add something up to a number like 100. And what it says is, using 100 as a scale, please identify these and rank importance. And so what a constant sum scale does is it makes you face reality. So service may be important, delivery may be, training maybe not so much, but then customer service is a 30. And guess what we got now? We've got a ranking. And so this is why when you're doing these, you can't simply ask who's the most important, your mother or your father. No, what you want to do is you want to have reality, and reality is based on a constant sum scale. So apparently Palmentier partnered with CDW with a lot of this stuff. So this is actually an actual survey that was sent out to end users for a new high technology product. And what we have here is we have 4 unique groups. So they sent out those questions. They had them fill out in a constant sum scale. These individuals in this unique market segment collected together, and they're called lowest total cost pre-sales info segment. So that's one segment. The next group is called responsive support post-sales segment. The next is called full service relationship segment. And the next is called references and credentials segment. So we're going to be good marketing scientists, and we're going to think this stuff through. We're going to not just stare at the numbers and read the pages. We're actually going to think about what the numbers mean. So I'm looking at this number and I see lowest price. Lowest price takes up a third of that, almost 1/3 of the total 100%. So obviously that's big. So what's second and third? Responsive assistance during the decision process, proactive advice and consulting, product demonstrations and trials. There's also this kind of thing that they're looking like freebies to me. You know, I mean, they want me to do everything at the beginning and then give me a price. But then again, after that, you don't need any response after the sale. Nobody wants an ongoing relationship. There can be some training and support. So this group looks to me, just in trying to make an inference, a second order process, it tells me that this group already has their own service department. They take care of all their stuff. They want to invest time in before the sale, understanding it, but then after that, they're okay. So there's 16% of the market, which is important. It's a valuable segment. And the fact that they want a lot of falderall at the beginning, do I really want to deal with that? Maybe, maybe not. I'll have to see. So the second group is responsive support, post-sale segment. So price means next to nothing, all right? They're looking at lowest price as a minimum. The biggest thing is that they want responsive problem solving after the sale. So responsive problem solving is a very proactive word to me. It says that you've got to be deliberate in the amount of work that you do. They want installation and training, which is the next highest thing. And then they want an ongoing relationship with the supplier. So this tells me that I need to have my own geek squad. If I am going to go after this group, I've got to make sure that I'm always pitching service contracts, both on-site and in-house, and see if I can get them to agree to one of those. Now, here's the problem. It's only 13% of the respondents. So do I devote all of the resources to that? It's a big difference. The next is full service relationship. And this is kind of spread all over the map. They do want a one-stop solution. They want an ongoing relationship. They want installation, training, and support, responsive problem solving, and they're very, very balanced all over. And they want a full service kind of organization to take care of them. Not only that, but a big thing is that there's 61% of the respondents. So that's a big group. So I got to think about that one. And the last one, kind of funky. I think of this as like either a military or a government organization that does bidding, because they want you to bring all sorts of references at the beginning, show that you're financially stable, do product demonstrations and be proactive. But then after that, they don't care. All right. Which is interesting to me also is that lowest price doesn't mean anything. So the bidding process may not necessarily be the way that I sell this to. It's an awful lot of fluff to me. I mean, that you've got to know, you know, who's your family and where you're from, that kind of thing. It just seems like to me, and it's 10% of the market. This one to me would be the most difficult to crack because to me, like it seems like they just want to know if you're the right kind of person to sell to. I'm never the right person. So this is just me looking at this and thinking about this over and over again. I would think the two most attractive ones to go after would be this one, and that's 3/4 of everything. All right. So in essence, I would do not a single segment, I would do a dual segment strategy. And these are the groups that I would build my channel systems around. It would also have to mean that I would have to be invested heavily in service with that. And it means that I would have to be, as I said, in tight with service contracts to make sure that those costs are taken care of. Now, the other part of this question is do I have the organization that can make this work? That is another serious critical piece, because if I don't have the long legs to run with these people, then I could be getting myself in the world of hurt. And the other thing also while I'm at it is I'm not going to give these people away. I mean, they may want a lot before the beginning, but they're the least pain when it comes to selling to them. You know, if they don't care about an ongoing relationship and responsive problem solving, then why should I? So anyway, these are the kinds of things that actually come out when you're trying to come up with understanding and ways of being able to sell to end users by supply chain. So realize that all of this is predicated on whether or not the segment is willing to pay for it. Remember, from our definitions in marketing and principles, demand only happens when the consumer desires it and they have a willingness or ability to pay. And so if I'm coming up with service outputs that are beyond the realm of my consumers to pay for them, then I'm in trouble. What it also means is that if I'm doing to specific segments, I need to deliver more of some service outputs than to others, like very good financial terms would be an example, especially if I'm looking at service contracts. I have to do more investment in risk, more investment in financing. And then finally, it is very unlikely that one channel strategy will satisfy the needs of all segments. Yes?
How do you make sure that you're getting a representative sample when you're segmenting end users? Because like with the constant sound scale,
Right.
it's kind of difficult to survey.
That's an excellent question. The only way to get a representative sample is to have a large sample size. Power requires that you do enough survey to make the numbers work, okay? Most good research techniques, when you do marketing research, you'll understand this. Most good research techniques are predicated on the concept of power, which is the number of responses that you have. Also, there's what's called unconscious bias. And that also happens because there's always the individuals who you don't survey who could give you just as much value as well. Good survey work requires effort, and that's about all as I can say. Now, research, generally there's a fine line between about 200 responses and about 1,000. Because the difficulty, especially with traditional marketing research, is if you're doing, oh gosh, I'm going blank. If you're going regression, or any of the other techniques that you're doing, they're built to be able to find significance out of reasonable size numbers like 400. The problem with analytics, folks, for those of you going to analytics, is that the number of points can be 100,000 or more now. And so the traditional techniques of doing research are just out the window. And so that's the difference between analytics and research. Research is done in a certain sample size, whereas analytics is built on numbers in the hundreds of thousands. And what happens is everything is significant if you use traditional research methods. And when everything is significant, nothing is significant. So I hope that answers the question. You just got to do enough research to make it right, okay? N equals 30. If you have 30 responses, this may be a marketing research question for you. That is enough for what's called a normal distribution, okay? That's the minimum standard. I actually used N equals 30 when I was first working in my dissertation. Ultimately, I had 2,000 data points, which made my work look good, okay? Yeah, do your research. Do your research and not be satisfied until you get it right. Good question. So, how do you go about targeting end users? Targeting end users is a process. Just like when you target using integrated marketing communications or with your product, it's the same steps. Nothing's different. So the first thing you do is you assess the segment's attractiveness. So attractiveness is a very nebulous kind of word. Attractiveness is a group that is closely aligned with your core competencies. In other words, this group is close to being able to be satisfied by your best efforts. And so that's what the segment attractiveness is. Now, just as we had 4 segments here, we assess which one of those are valued, and then we target the subsets that we identify. And so what I mean by targeting the subsets, I said I'm targeting this one and I'm targeting this one. And I'm giving 2 different messages to 2 different groups. And then finally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to customize each channel solution to sell to each targeted segment. And so targeting is the exact same thing as if we were talking about principles. It's choosing to focus on a segment with the goal of achieving significant sales and profits by selling directly to it. Mass General Store does an excellent job in targeting their particular individuals who come into the town, and their online store does the exact same thing. Foot Sloggers, which is 2 blocks down the road, targets an entirely different group of individuals, totally different subset, totally different age group and whatever, and they do the exact same thing. They focus on that segment, they become experts in that segment, and ultimately that's how they achieve significant profits. And what it also means, and is important to understand, is that you also are choosing which segments not to target. You build different channels for each subset. So for the first group that we talked about, I'll keep it here and I'll just talk in relationship. I would have one group, which is the Geek Squad group, which is for those who want that after sales support. The full purpose relationship group, I might keep the Geek Squad, but I might also add some customer service reps who can answer questions in-house at the same time. That would be an example of creating service outputs and channels to work for each one of those groups. And then realize that this is an iterative process. And so the information on the targeted segments, you can design those new channels to meet those needs. And there's always serendipitous effects, which means that there's always an added benefit. All right. It is amazing sometimes just how focusing the mind and drilling down and looking at particular clients will also help you to run your business, because many of us are big thinkers, other of us are detail thinkers, and this works on both the left and right brain side. So the last is to give you kind of an example of how this works, and one in your own modern era. Any of you order your movie tickets online? Yeah, we all do, of course. Well, one of those groups that has gotten into marketing channels was Fandango. And Fandango was actually formed by 7 of the 10 largest movie exhibitors. And they were looking at channels as their way of focusing on a segment. These are individuals who did not want, or they wanted as low as possible, a delivery time and a waiting time. They are constrained by time. They like a higher spatial convenience. In other words, they want to give it to me, and a broad assortment of variety, because you can go on Fandango and shop for tickets in Concord as well as you can shop for them in Boom. And so this is an example how service output demand worked for a particular market segment, and it did it quite well. Okay. All right. So end of chapter 2. And now we're going to begin with chapter 3. On Thursday, I would like you to bring a calculator with you because we're going to be doing some calculations. Because auditing requires you to do some number stuff, all right? Nothing that you haven't done since 5th grade, I promise you. You know, we're not going to be Dr. Stoddard's class doing derivatives and sales management, all right? Ain't going to happen. He said confidently. So, auditing a channel. If you don't know where you are, anywhere will get you there, is an old statement. What auditing a channel does is that it helps us to understand whether the channel is moving efficiently or not. Many times we don't know how well to build our channel systems until we actually get a snapshot of who we are and where we are. And that's what auditing does. Auditing is critical. It is absolutely important. I have a good friend of mine who's in the auditing department here at App State. And it has been amazing what she's seen over the last 10 years. But a lot of it is valued because it ultimately means that we're spending the money you're giving us in the most efficient way. After all, you're paying for this. So, after identified targeting segments, let's find out where we are. And so that's what auditing does. It allows us to evaluate the available channel right now. It helps us identify who does what, the channel members that we have, at what levels do they do them, and at what cost. So let me go break down by who, at what levels, and what costs. By whom is, who are the members in the channel environment in which you're working in? Of the 9 channel functions, do you have 9 members that do all of that work? Are they all specialized? At what levels mean how important are those members? What value do they bring to the channel environment? And then finally, at what cost? Which means, what do we have to give up for? Now, that seems kind of superfluous, but there's a very important principle that auditing hopes to do. And what it hopes to do is be able to reward the individuals in the membership who deserve it. And many times, that isn't true. We will talk about the equity principle on Tuesday and how valuable it is and how important it is. Well, maybe Thursday, excuse me. And so if we're going to decide or find out who does what, we now have to go to that friendly connection that we had, those 9 channel functions that we ignored in the first chapter. And it's time for us to say hello to them and talk to them about them a little bit more. So the first thing we do is we're going to, excuse me, before I go on, what are the values of auditing? Well, hopefully what we'll do is that we'll remedy shortcomings or service gaps in the provisioning of our goods or the price to our segments. It's always scary when you leave money on the table, and that happens a lot, okay? I'll never forget the second house I ever bought. I bought in a small town of Columbia. It was a takeover, and I was buying it. And I said, I'm gonna throw one number down, and because I'm gonna have to do so much work on it. This was 1990, so I said 45, and she said sold. Too high, you know. They agreed too quick. I left money on the table. Identify gaps in the service outputs. There may be things that consumers want more if we spent more time thinking about it, and then finally, it helps the members who are in the channel system get rewarded for their honest efforts. This is a very difficult thing. Babe Ruth once said, "You'll never get paid as much as you think as long as you work for someone else." And this equity principle is a valued one, because ultimately what happens is if people do not feel like they're being fairly compensated, they will leave. 100 years ago, 1923, Babe Ruth wanted $150,000. Branch Rickey said, "You'll be making more money than the president." And Babe Ruth said, "Why not? I had a better year than he did." Okay, so benefits of auditing. Here they are. So, without further ado, let's look at the functions. Yes, there's that very busy slide. Don't spend too much time looking at it, otherwise you'll go blind. But there's one other thing after this one that I want you to see, and it's this idea that everything has a cost. Each function has a cost, regardless. They all do. There are no freebies. And so that if you're going to match one, you must match it against another. And perhaps the highest of all of them will be physical possession and ownership, and we'll talk about those one at a time. So, without further ado, here we go. So we talked about physical possession 3 weeks ago. Physical possession is more than just the physical goods themselves. These are all of the activities that are involved in the storage of goods, the transportation of the goods in and between channel members. This also includes things like third-party logistic providers who do the shipping and the storing for you. Ownership is all of those activities concerning the transfer of title of the goods. Now, as we talked about in week 1, physical possession and ownership follow each other, but they don't necessarily have to be. And so that is example that I came up with, it was consignment shops. You can actually be a salesperson and not have physical possession of the equipment that you're selling. A real estate agent does not have the property that they're selling, yet they represent the seller in all things, including conclusions of the sale, of which they get a percentage fee. Now, I want to talk about physical possession and ownership a little bit more, because I want you be conscious of a concept. There's a definition of physical possession and ownership, and that equals what's known as inventory holding cost. Okay. These are the stocks of goods that you have for sale for consumers to purchase. Now, if I were to look at a balance sheet, I would see, things like cash on hand, I would see accounts receivable, and I would see inventory. And inventory is listed as an asset on the balance sheet, but I'm calling it a cost. Why would inventory be a cost? Anybody want to just venture a guess or a thought? You have to pay to steal the inventory. Exactly. Same thing or close to it?
Pretty much. I guess, inventory unsold is a cost.
Oh my God, it's the most horrible thing in the world. Absolutely. You're right on it. Okay. Inventory. Yes, we have to sell something, but there is nothing that drains capital like inventory. That it is the great crapshoot. It is whether you have rolled sevens or you've got snake eyes and you're out. All right. Inventory holding cost is absolutely essential, and yet it is the worst thing possible because especially if you don't sell the goods. So there's a concept known as turnover. Anybody ever heard of turnover, by the way? Okay, cool. All right. So this is what turnover means. Turnover means I buy $1,000 worth of goods, and in a year, those $1,000 worth of goods, I sell $1,000 out of inventory. What that means is that the inventory turnover rate in 1 year is 1. I just want you to think of that. Inventory turnover means that I have sold the total capacity of everything that I bought in a single year. That's what turnover means. Now, what if I bought $1,000 worth of goods, I sold 500, and my turnover rate is 0.5? What's the danger in that? Yes.
Half your stock went up.
Exactly. I've got half my stock left over from a given year that I haven't sold already. And the prospects of selling those goods is pretty grim. Not only that, but what if those goods are fashion or style or anything else like that that is very period related? I'm in a hurt, okay? And so what you're ideally looking for is you're looking for turnover rates over 1 or better. And then just in time, where basically you have no inventory, you can get turnover rates like 65, and that's like insane, okay? But that's in the best practices. And now we're in the brave new world after COVID, where just in time has kind of melted away to just in case. So we don't know really where the world's going with this. But having said all of that, inventory is important. Inventory is in value, but it is the chain around your neck. Okay, you've got to be smart when it comes to inventory, and that's why all you supply chain people out there have jobs waiting for you. Okay, you got to solve their problems. So, but why do you have inventory? Why do you have it? One of them is the reasons why. Why inventory? One is that demand outstrips production. So way back in 2004, I was still in IT, and I was reading Nintendo had this amazing new kinetic interface that they were coming out with, and Nintendo needed it like now. When the Wii was announced, it was 6 months away. Nintendo as a corporation was 6 months away from bankruptcy. All of that changed after the Wii. Not only that, for at least 3 Christmases afterwards, you couldn't find a Wii after November when it came to Christmas shopping. So that's an example that many times demand will outstrip supply. The next is you get the economies of scale. Quite simply, you make more, it costs less. And you can't deny the economies of scale. And so manufacturers, however, in the realm of 3D printing, let me also say this, those rules have been changed lately as well. So not everything is exact, but let's just leave economies of scale as the other reason why. The next is transportation takes time. They're quite simply, it is impossible to move certain goods in certain directions in certain ways. Even though I am amazed. Well, we have a lot of slack now in delivery. So, I mean, you're getting next day deliveries from Amazon now, which is just remarkable. But still, transportation does take time. And the last is that supply and demand are uncertain. Supply and demand are uncertain. And so what do we do with three difficulties? How do we solve this? How do we tie the Gordian knot? Well, we have what's known as safety stock. Safety stock. We do invest in extra stock. And this is usually the best estimate of what we're going to need in a given cycle. It's our best guess. All right. Yes.
What about sale forecasters?
There's a lot of that goes on, absolutely, especially if you're in if you're in industries that are especially season oriented. Okay, sales forecasting is absolutely important. The difficulty of every once in a while is you'll have a once in a lifetime event like COVID come along and totally mess up the works. Yeah, you need sales forecasting. You hope that you're always right. Usually it's pretty good because the research has gotten better and better, but you need to have as much flexibility as possible. And once again, just in time has kind of faded away into just in case. And so these are the four great issues that sales forecasting always has to deal with. Is that it's nearly impossible sometimes to predict demand. You know, you've got to have a certain amount of production, otherwise you can't buy, you know, the transportation issues that you have, and then the uncertainty with supply and demand. It's a good question. You know, you do your best, you know, that's what everybody tries to do. And sometimes you make it and sometimes you don't. And especially after the post-COVID world, we're all kind of shaking up going, you know, how do we figure out what to do? So, well, you just try. Okay, so promotion are those activities that seeks to increase the awareness of the product. They're always straight down. These can either be push or pull techniques. Push techniques coming directly from the retailer, such as a Foot Slogger or Foot Locker or any of those others. Or it could be from the manufacturer selling down directly to the consumer and the consumer pulling the demand through the system, i.e. pharmaceutical sales. Negotiation, if I could recommend any of you to have a class in negotiation, I cannot emphasize it enough. Everything is open to negotiation. Everything. And if you're good at negotiating, you're usually good at other things as well. But negotiation is present in the channel, you know, even if there's persistence in certain relationships, everything is open to negotiation. And it also, you know, leads to superior value if you're good at it. That's all I can say. Usually it's measured in personnel time and negotiations, the cost of the legal contracts, but many times it's how fast you can cut to the chase. And that's what I try to do in my negotiations, but not as good as all that. Financing. Can anybody tell me what that means? Yes.
Like discounts?
Yes. Well, yes. Keep going. You're right there.
I don't know. I just, that's one.
All right. So then the 30 with the N, what do you think that might be?
Doesn't it have something to do with if you buy within 10 days, save 2%, and then you have to buy within 30?
There you go. That's it. Exactly that. If any of you ever see this on an invoice, it means if you pay within 10 days, you can take 2% off of the invoice. Otherwise, it is due within 30 days. Now, financing are all the costs inherent to any sale that moves from one channel member to another. But I want you to also understand the gravity of financing as well. I mean, financing is trust. Financing basically says that the seller is willing to finance the buyer for up to 30 days. It's giving the buyer a 30-day loan on that money. As a seller, I am willing to forego the investment of that asset, the assets being the money delivered, just so I can sell to you. That is a very powerful statement. Sometimes gets overlooked. By the way, if any of you ever go into business by yourself, the number one first thing, absolutely, I've run 3, is get credit references started as quickly as you can, okay? So what that means is that I've gone from COD cashier's check to eventually 30-day terms. And believe me, your businesses can't run efficiently without it. And so financing is important. And also, of course, along with that is it's inherent in risk, okay? Just remember that long-term contracts between the end users and the distributors help to lock up certain prices. But what that also means is that there's the uncertainty that goes along with it. So I've got 2 examples of how risk and financing work together. So I'll use Delta Airlines and I'll use Southwest Airlines. So Delta Airlines, one of the largest fleet operators in the world, they have 29 different airframes, which means there's 29 different kinds of planes that they use based upon, you know, the number of mergers and acquisitions that they've been through. All right. So just imagine what it must be like to be a crew mechanic and know that you have 29 different airframes that you have to service in a given day, or possibly. All right. So Delta does not take to risk kindly. And one of the most volatile things, what takes up 2/3 of the price of any ticket, is jet fuel. And so what Delta does is they buy 80% of their jet fuel up front, and they have even bought a refinery in Pennsylvania so that they can manufacture their own jet fuel. That's how little risk they can handle. Southwest, everybody ever fly out of Southwest Airlines? Okay, yeah, a few people. Okay, how many airframes does Southwest Airlines fly? 1. That's right, 737. Yep. Southwest is an interesting airline. They actually started from a 3-city hub in Texas. So it started from Dallas to Houston to San Antonio. And basically they suddenly realized, well, we've got all of these 737 jets with ranges of 1,000 miles. Why aren't we flying to other places? That's how the magic of Southwest was born. They only fly the 737, so that's the reason why they do Central and South America and even Hawaii, but they won't go across the Atlantic Ocean, okay? They can handle a lot of risk. They only have 30% of their jet fuel in reserves. In other words, they only pay for 1/3 in reserve and everything else is in the spot market. In other words, they're willing to take a risk with prices going up and down. And for Southwestern, they've made out like a bandit. They've done well on it. But it's only because Southwestern can handle much more risk than Delta can. Different boats, different strokes. Okay. Ordering and payment are the costs incurred during the actual payment and the purchase of a product. Information sharing is not only just the sales trends, the technical support, and all the information content, but there's an important reason for sharing information. You want to transfer information into inventory. And so what that means is that the information that you're giving to these corporations has to have a purpose. You're trying to get them to translate the information you give them into inventory that they purchase. And that's where the focus needs to be on the information you share. Sometimes I was always fascinated to listen to my own voice. So I always said too much, especially when I was selling computers. At some point I should have said, pay me and I'll tell you the rest. All right. Sometimes we give away too much. They go somewhere else and buy it cheaper. And so the information you share should be information that is sellable, that you translate that. All right, I've got one last statement to go through. And I want you to kind of understand this last statement. Here's the last statement. The costs associated with performing channel functions demands that you do not perform unnecessarily well. Now, what does all of that folderol mean? So, cost is one of those dirty words that marketing people are not supposed to talk about. I remember in my marketing theory class, I was using the classic definition about marketing, to do the marketing thing at a reasonable rate of return. And the chair of the department, Barry, snapped at me and said, "You let the accountants figure out the money. You just worry about value." And I went, "Yes, sir," since he was the guy who was signing off my dissertation. However, I'm going to talk about it now. The cost that we have associated with channels is enormous. As I've said before, it's the most difficult. It's the most expensive to change. And it also requires so many different interrelationships with other individuals. Because of that, waste is of the essence. The waste can be the difference between profit and loss. And so you want to be able to perform all your service outputs and avoid any unnecessary costs that you can. What this also means is that if you're achieving things beyond what the consumer wants, then you're wasting money. All right? We'll talk about service gaps later, but all I have to do is say record shops, and that might cue you in on performing unnecessarily well. Anybody know what a blockbuster is? You all know what a blockbuster is. What was it? What? Video rentals. Yeah, video rentals. On a Friday night, there was a line that stretched out on the street. I remember it well. You go to the Blockbuster, you get your videos, while you're there, you get your candy, you get everything else. Blockbusters were gigantic. And then about 2004, a little red box came out and killed Blockbuster. Why? Because it was essentially more than people wanted. All the people wanted was the video to rent and as many places, spatial convenience as they possibly could find. And that is a classic example of how channels shut down a very, very popular place. Okay, we're done. Thursday, bring your calculators. Have a good day, folks.